Ann Selzer has been on two-way before. As I've said before, I've worked with Ann in the past when I worked at Bloomberg. Ann is one of the best pollsters in America, and Ann has been much in the news. Ann, welcome. Thank you for coming. How is it been in the news?
How is it fitting in the news?
How is it being in the news? How's it
Oh,
gone for you in the last few
well,
days?
every day is a new day, and you
Yeah.
don't know what you're going to wake up to, what's in your inbox, what's in your voicemail. I'll be happy when that dies down a little bit.
Okay. So
I don't think
you've
it's
got some,
going to for a while, though. So,
probably not, but we're hoping your appearance tonight
yeah.
will address some questions that people have. I've run through these points before. I don't even think you need to speak, but if you want a thumbs up or nod, whatever. Uh, you didn't do or release the poll to help or hurt any political candidate. I know.
Correct.
You don't do that. You did the poll to the best of your ability. I know that. You didn't leak the poll to people to help the Democratic Party. You did not assume that by putting out your poll, or your motive in putting out the poll was not to hurt Donald Trump or help Kamala Harris. And finally, you're not part of any conspiracy. You simply did what you've done for many years. You did a poll with the Des Moines Register of Iowa voters. All
Mhm.
correct. Um, uh, there's so much suspicion about polling in general. And one of the things that frustrates me about the reaction to your poll is you just did one poll of Iowa. It wasn't like it was some like multi-million dollar effort to influence the election. So even if the conspiracy theorists are accurate, the notion that your poll would have some impact on how people would vote in the battleground states, I find that humorous, but that's a subsidiary point to the other points we made. So Ann's going to be available for your questions. First, though, she's been nice enough for us to put together some slides, seen here for the first time, explaining the situation with the poll. And the floor is yours. Ann's going to put her slides up. I'm going to take my video away so everybody can just see Ann. Uh, Ann's going to share her screen and narrate some purposely not very pretty slides for two-way. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. I hope that in hindsight, I'm happy I decided to do it, but where else am I going to find this mix of audience with this level of sophistication and experience? And I wanted to sort of spend some time walking through what it was like to see this poll, to think about it, the checks we made, and then sort of run through some theories that some people have had about why the poll might not be right. And maybe I welcome any thoughts from this audience, things that I haven't thought of. There are plenty of things I've thought of and dismissed that I'm not going to bother you with. But what we were seeing at, at, at the final poll was something that looked like it made some sense given our September poll. In that poll, we had a narrowing of the race that had been between Biden and Trump that had been quite wide down to just a 4 point race. And when you put it with all these months in between when we weren't polling, but that our final poll looked like a linear straight line. And pollsters like linear straight lines because it suggests that there's something happening, that this poll was just an extension of all of the things that led to that narrow race in September. Of course, it's a stunning poll. And we go looking with every poll, we do a lot of double checking, but when it's a stunning outcome, we want to double check some other things. So I'm showing you as much of the raw data. The reason it's not pretty is I want you to see it the way we saw it in all of its glory here. So the day by day tracking was a mix. So from the first day, we had Harris up by 2 points. The second day was a tie. The third day, this would have been Wednesday before the election, Harris had a good day. And then the next day, Trump had a good day. So, there's no sort of linearity here, though the ultimate outcome of the 3 point difference was there. Pollsters like to smooth out those lines. So we look at rolling 2 day averages. And what you can see here is when we did that, there was pretty much stasis. Things did not change from the first 2 days to the second 2 days to the third 2 days as we rolled those forward. No real difference there. So we think, okay, it's not a big deal here. We did see some things that raised a flag about is our sample right? Is our weighting right? And just as a quick reminder, we gather data from over 1,000 people in order to get the 800, which is what we want to end up with, and collect demographic data on those people so that we have a larger group that we can make look like a cross section of Iowa, weighting by age and sex and congressional district. Um, and then we just pull out the likely voters. And the idea of that is that how the electorate is shaping up will be revealed in that without us making assumptions. We do not like the word assumptions. So here was one thing that stuck out in kind of an interesting way. We had fewer people who said they were living in an urban area as well as suburban area, and we had more people saying they were living in in the country or in a town. Well, city suburbs, that goes for Harris, that tracks with Harris. So to have fewer there and more in areas that track with Trump, it's kind of counterintuitive that the Harris finding that we showed was was an illusion because our data weren't proper there. If anything, we would have expected this alone to show a number bigger for Trump. This is also is a little hard to read, but we also were looking at the incidence, that is, the proportion of each of these demographic groups who met our criterion as a likely voter. So September numbers is this, and the October numbers were this, and there were some key differences in terms of the proportion of people who qualified to be likely voter. Younger people less likely in our October poll by 15 percentage points. Women a lower number by 4 percentage points. The third congressional district, which includes Des Moines, and is therefore and we had a relatively close race, although the Republican ended up winning. So to show declines in each of those demographics when our September poll had shown these very demographics to be very important for Harris's move upward. We did have a higher number of seniors, and that was an important group for Harris as well. But these declines would make one think our poll is going to show Trump doing better because the Harris supporters weren't showing up in numbers we were used to seeing and just saw in September. There were two findings that made us sort of pause, scratch our head, think about it, and that is the self-reported party ID. So we were showing not too far much difference between Republicans and Democrats and independents. Iowa has traditionally been 30-30-30, a little bit different from some previous polling we've done to kind of take a look at it. So that's a standout. And we did ask, who did you vote for in 2020? And the reason we do that is really to identify the group, a banner point, we would call it, of people who had voted for Trump before. What are they doing now? Same way with Joe Biden. What are they doing now? And especially people who did not vote. So these numbers don't look like what actually happened in Iowa in 2020, but we don't know how that would affect this future electorate. I'm going to talk more about this and show you some more data here shortly, but those were the two standout things. We wondered if our weighting structure in some way was getting in the way of what we were seeing, if it was manufacturing the outcome that we got. That's a good question, and we took a look at it, and our weighting report, which we've published online, so if you want to go look, you can find it, was so minimal that any pollster I know, and if there are some in our audience tonight, they would look at it and go, wow, there was minimal effect between the unweighted data and the weighted data. So what I'm just pulling out here is the horse race, 47-40 when we applied our weights, 47-44 unweighted. And you can find a full questionnaire for both of those online if you want to take a look. So there isn't anything going on in our weighting structure that is artificially tilting things toward Harris. It's the way we've always tilted. In my mind, it's kind of been our secret weapon about how we do it. But I was asked in on the call, on the final call, with the reporters and editors at the Des Moines Register and our team here, is this the biggest swing that you'd ever seen? Because, if something is the biggest, you're going to really think about it. And the swing that I could remember that was bigger than this, scarier than this, was Indiana in 2008. We were polling for the Indianapolis Star, and the state had gone for George W. Bush in 2004 by 21 points. So when our final poll showed Obama ahead by less than a point, I think it was zero point 0.6, so it rounded up to 1 percentage point, that was kind of hard to fathom. But it turned out that Obama won by zero point 0.9 percentage points. So a huge swing of 22 points from the way the state had gone before to the way that had done. And we'd been on the front seat of that, nervous about it, and then it all kind of looked pretty big. This is one of the biggest outliers, and everybody was ultimately comfortable with publishing, but you'd have every right to wonder, why did that poll ever get published? Because we looked at the data and couldn't find things that were wrong that made us doubt anything else. If you're going to have the horse race wrong, you're going to see other things that just don't look right there. So we've since the election, literally every day, I'm reanalyzing things. I come in every morning after a 4 o'clock wake up going, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. So we've been looking at things. And I think the two that people would be right to single out is, why did we not do something with party ID? And my answer to that is, we don't know ahead of time what the ultimate party ID distribution is going to look like. And what we gather, because we're doing random digit dialing, is just how people self-identify. We don't ask them how are they registered. And we have enough experience, and the data I'm showing you here is from a different client, not an election poll, but the sample for that was the voter list. So we had them self-identify by party, and then we could compare it. We could pull out how they are actually registered, and you'll see that there's a fair amount of inconsistency. And whether they don't remember how they're registered or they've just changed their mind, in any case, I wait to known population parameters and the right distribution of people who show up on election day or cast an early ballot is an unknown factor. There's not, you'd have to guess in order to, you'd have to assume, not a word that I like. And I showed you a previous study, we repeated the same study and the same phenomenon. So people didn't get better over time with that. The other thing, this has been very fashionable, to talk about the recalled vote. And again, it's not something that I would think about waiting toward, because how do I know that this future electorate is going to be identical to how the, the, the electorate of Iowa voted in 2020? I think that's a huge assumption. But because we like to play with data, we thought, okay, well, what if we did that? And what if we weighted it to look like Trump at 53, Biden at almost 45, and other at 2, which is about what the way it came out the last time around, and then everybody else we treated as though they just stand for themselves. We don't tilt them one way or another. So the gap became 6 points for Trump. It did move in that direction. It'd be hard for it not to. And that's a little bit of my problem. That you could make the race look closer, but how do you know how close is close enough? This is probably the maximum weighting we could apply to that. And there's still a 6-point difference for Trump, and he won by 13 points. So it's not going to help you. And just the idea of making assumption of what this future electorate might be, and especially given that 2020 was such an odd election because of COVID and because of the way people were voting and the turnout that was then. So that's a little bit of some variables that I looked through. and that we've been playing through. And I'll just mention in an unprecedented display of transparency, there are a lot of research documents that you can find on the Des Moines Register website, including a full set of crosstabs, a tabulated questionnaire showing weighted versus unweighted data, my research notes along with that. Um, the only trick of being in the election polling business is being clairvoyant. And I don't happen to possess that talent for clairvoyance. So therefore, I want to make sure that I can ground anything I do to my data in something that is as close to known fact as we know. So the idea of weighting by a variable that is partisan tainted is taboo in my book. I feel like you might as well just weight the horse race to what it is you think it's going to be. And that sounds absurd. I hope that sounds absurd. And we'll figure that out. And as I said, I've seen wilder final polls than this one that turned out to be true. So my since the election, my inbox has been full of anger, hatred, and certainty, which is a combination. I don't really know. But the idea that I manufactured this outcome, some thought that there'd been money that changed hands. I have no idea how that would actually work. In the manufacturing part, I can show that the weighting of the data did virtually nothing. Um, I will say that my inbox has been comfortably full of some people who offer a suggestion about, well, you might look at this or you might look at this and call me up. I've got another idea for you. And some of those will be informed once the Secretary of State's analysis with all the counties are coming back in. I really can't wait for it. And I sent them a note saying, hey, really, when's the first you're going to know? It's going to be a couple of months. But a lot of my inbox and voicemail are full of conspiracy theories that sound just like the exact opposite of the conspiracy theories that was the stolen election of 2020. They're sort of saying this was a stolen election and look at this and look at this. But I'm sure you're thinking that maybe I have hunches that I can't really test with data because if I can test it with data, that's going to make me happy. Um, there's a possibility that the voters in my sample aren't a perfect cross section of the voters who vote. That's been true since I first started using this method in 2008. But there would be voters who passed my voter screen and they're in my poll, but they didn't end up voting. That happens. That hasn't happened in a way that made those past votes inaccurate. There are voters not in my sample. That is people who didn't pass my screen, who then ended up actually going to vote. Maybe they just said they would probably vote and then they ended up voting, but my screen is stringent. You have to say you've already voted or that you will definitely vote. So I am and would continue to be looking at what I learn about the voter screen, just for my own satisfaction. If my voter screen is too stringent, that's worth knowing. Um, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I think it's time to go back to the Indiana poll here. That we did a test once we saw where the Obama vote was and gathered people. We saw it lurching in that direction. And in our final poll, if you don't pass our voter screen, we get demographics, sex, age, what county do you live in, race. Um, but for people who didn't pass the screen in this particular case, we said, well, if you were going to vote, who would you vote for? And we were looking for the hidden McCain vote. And actually, what we found, if anything, was a tilt toward Obama. So we've played with, doing a screen differently and trying to determine who we leave out. And again, that poll turned out near perfect. There might have been something that happened between when we finished polling on Thursday night and election day. And that could be in the case of, Newtonian physics. That is, for an action, there's an equal opposite reaction. I don't know about equal, But contrary to what was being charged, it could be that the release of that vote got the Republicans more hustled up and more bringing more people to the poll, and that it had the impact of actually inflating the Trump vote. I don't know. I don't have any data for that. I will say that in terms of things happening between the end of polling and election day, 2004, our poll had John Kerry winning by a very small margin over George W. Bush. And I was deflated and unhappy. And I got a lecture from former Governor Terry Branstad, who, if there's a person at that time who knew where every vote was, he was the guy. And he said, let me tell you what happened in Sioux City over that final weekend. And there was this huge rally. It had been closed to the press, so there was no reporting on it. But what they had put together by way of a get out the vote effort, people showed up to that rally who had no idea they were going to need to go find 10 more people to go and vote, and that they had to sign a pledge that they were going to do that. Things like that. And he said that's why you lost, because the fifth district, as it was then, was more than enough to make up for the eastern Iowa votes for Kerry and push it over the top for George W. Bush. He also said that's why Senator Tom Daschle lost his seat in South Dakota. There was just such an impact of something that happened once we had finished our interviewing. And in my way back past, before I was really an Iowan, two Democratic senators from Iowa lost their seats in what has been attributed to Abortion Sunday. And Abortion Sunday is when you've got pamphlets of ugly photos and pictures and rhetoric, and every car in every Catholic church parking lot on Saturday night and Sunday morning gets a big, hard, late hit with that. I had heard that there was a big buy, maybe somebody on this call knows, for the trans ad that would have played during Saturday college football, Sunday pro football, Monday night football, and then there was enough of it that it moved people who in my poll might have said they weren't going to vote and turned them around. So the things I think about, I think I'm going to feel better once I see actual hard data. Um, I'm appreciative of the people. We've set up a special email for that. Um, I think the one last thing that, Mark, I don't think you mentioned is that my plan to stop doing election polling that would be released to the public has been years in the making, and there are people who can attest to that. Um, Including Carol Hunter, the executive editor of the Des Moines Register. So the timing of this is unfortunate, but it's coincidental. It's not causation. I was not fired. I told them I would not be renewing my contract. But that sounds like a situation coming. You can't fire me. I quit. But that's bothersome that people didn't read the documents and are reporting that that's what's happening here. And as I said, um, there's a lot of data that you can go and look at on the Des Moines Register's website if you're eager to get into it. We've set up a special email account for people who have comments, questions, and suggestions. But I want to close with saying how important this platform has been in thinking about theories, listening to real people with real concerns, and being able to, as you talk to each other, I can't tell you how many times I've quoted somebody from this platform because it so seemed to hit a mark that some people were not able to figure out and how to make that go. So I want to thank Mark for creating this platform. And as I said, I wanted to talk about kind of foresight and hindsight. And I've given you a little bit of both. What do we do so we don't have to rely on guesswork? And what can we learn in hindsight? I can't say I can leave you with a satisfying result. Um, I don't know how I could have had the hindsight if I didn't have the data, because I'm a data girl. I'm always going to rely on data. So I'll leave with that and
And th-
stop sharing
all
my
right,
screen.
all right. And thank you for that. I'm going to ask you just a few brief questions. I want to get in questions. We'll run a little bit over, and if you can stay just a few extra
I
minutes, if
can.
that's okay.
Sorry, I
It's
ran too long.
No, that's okay. It's also possible there's going to be an announcement of a Treasury Secretary any minute now, and
Okay.
so we'll stay on a little bit so we can review that as well. And you talked about early on in the slides, you showed some data that seemed off because it would suggest that Trump would be doing better rather than worse. Given that dissonance, did you ever consider saying to the Register, we shouldn't publish this poll? It just seems a little wacky.
Nor did the Register say to me, we're going to think about whether we publish this poll.
Have you ever in your career for a client, a media client, said we shouldn't publish this poll? Have you ever done that in your career?
No.
No.
I will tell you,
And
my first year at the Des Moines Register on staff, we showed a Dukakis friendly poll in the middle of summer. And unbeknownst to me, the newsroom met. And what was said was, is there anything else in this poll that makes you question whether it's good or not? And they couldn't say it. And so they said, we'll publish.
isn't it the case? I've always been told, I'm not a statistician, but I've always been told, even a perfectly done poll, one in something like 20 is just going to be off. Is that to your sense true?
It's not satisfying, but statistically, it's true that 95 times out of 100, it's going to fall within this range. It's not satisfying. I'd rather be more satisfied.
Yeah, but it's but that
If
but
there's
the
a big
explanation,
if there's a big mistake I made, I'd rather know, right?
yeah, but the explanation could be you made no mistake. It's just one in 20 polls is just off.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.